Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to discuss with you the subject of why the SME policy is a false hope gospel in PNG. So the over-exaggerated SME gospel of creating sustainable wealth for ordinary citizens here in PNG through entrepreneurship or some form of self-employment is a false hope gospel. This is because the SME policy itself is a cut and paste document that is trying to advise the government policymakers what can work by adopting it from another part of the planet. Even the entrepreneurs cannot make good sense of the entire document. That is the first point of failure in the entire SME scheme promoted by the government's hired white collar. Here's why it is not working. There are 6 main hurdles that make it extremely impossible for entrepreneurs to borrow under the SME arrangement from banks and financial institutions in PNG. Point number 1 would be that the policy itself is an adopted document and is only envisaged to work in PNG. 2, the policy cannot distinguish self-employed from real entrepreneurs. They are not the same things, and I'll take time to explain that in a minute. 3, the lenders in the policy framework are not willing to lend capital that is patient. I'll also have time to explain that. The 4th point is that the traditional lenders do not have the risk appetite to lend capital to what they call as high risk gap in the lower hand of the SME market in PNG. The 5th point is that the policy drivers are dishonest to make honest admittance of the policy's shortcomings. 6, the policy drivers are themselves the milk interest. In other words, they benefit big time from this policy. Let me now take time to explain the 6 points. Firstly, the policy was adopted and has not been trialed anywhere to understand its pros and cons. What works in another country like India or Sri Lanka cannot work here under the PNG's unique economic situation through this SME policy adopted by the government, simply for the reason that PNG is a very different synergy to those other countries. You cannot admire what works there to think it will work here at the press of a button. We can only adopt the learnings to model our own version of that success. The problems will be a different dilution of every combinations that should or pop out as a challenge. That's why that policy will not work here unless we develop something that is completely organic and fitting to the context of PNG's economic setting. It must address the capital requirements, ease of accessing capital, and a better risk model that will have the tolerance and appetite to take in enough risk for credit. Otherwise, the results we are seeing since the SME policy was introduced here are very seldomly evident today. Secondly, the real entrepreneurs are the very ones that are creating real wealth here and not the self-employed. And the government through this adopted SME policy is not supporting the entrepreneurs. They are only creating an avenue for self-employment which does not have the credentials to create sustainable and long-term wealth, except to fund lifestyles. Far from the truth, the self-employed are also struggling in an environment that is so cramped in fees before business cash flow is generated. And self-employment is not entrepreneurship. I have a separate video explaining this too in the channel, which you can check out. I'll also have a link below this video. Thirdly, most lenders in the government adopted SME policy are traditional lenders. They do not have the potential to lend at high risk environment because SME is a higher risk environment, and with higher risk also comes high rewards. But banks and financial institutions wouldn't want to risk that and will want to play it on a safe risk only as it is safer for them to do that. So the measures they will take would be such as higher equity component for lesser credit risk exposure, Rate of lending is dependent on cash flow coverage. Collateral is made a precedent requirement before lending. Equity is required in the form of cash other than other security instruments. All of the above I've just explained are traditional requirements in banking and finance. Capital is never lent on a patient process. If they funded you last month, this month they will be there at your door knocking to have their loan repayment or otherwise penalize you for the failure to do so. That is not patient capital. Patient capital is to let you to such a time and space you start generating cash flow and they can then start taking rental or loan repayments from you. So traditional banks don't encourage that, and that is what's failing this policy. And neither does this policy has the credentials to address this downside. The fourth point would be that the high risk gap is the gap between what the banks can and are willing to fund and what they cannot fund or have rejected. That gap is so huge. We have not taken time to look into the pros and cons of limiting this gap. In other words, the traditional funding institutions don't have the risk appetite or tolerance to take on these risk perceptions. Hence, they consider that as a highly risky and especially in volatile market situations. Even their risk mitigation strategies would not stand a chance to defend any prospects. Funny, this risk gap is where the SME base is. That is the gap that promotes the rhetoric line of SME. Makes one wonder, then what SME gap is the government through its policy and stimulus package of 200 million kina to BSP and 80 million kina to NDB is funding. One of the controversial points I want to make is the government does not have a measuring yardstick to measure the success of SME policy it introduced around 2016. By now we should have a measurement of how many millionaires we've created in the 5 or 8 years of this policy drive. We should have the stats of how many jobs we've created as a consequence of this policy intervention. It has subsequently none of this, and that leaves the question begging, is the SME policy working in PNG? Fifth point, one of the major setbacks also that the SME policy drivers are blatantly lying to the aspiring business startups. What they are not making honest admittance to the startups is that the 300 million kina expended in the bank stimulus package is not free money, as is the assumption. So the general assumption of startups in the lack of information think that the money they are borrowing through this stimulus package is free money or they are borrowing the actual government money. Allotted to the banks. That is not true. The 200 million kina given to BSP is a cushion or risk buffer. The truth is BSP is lending its own money against the 200 million kina. Startups are to borrow only within this risk buffer and not outside of this cushion. All the lending policies and guidelines of the bank will apply because BSP is lending its own money against the government's guarantee token. In the event you default as a customer to repay your loan, BSP will take out of the 200 million kina. That is what the policy drivers are denying the startups or business operators to know and understand. And the same applies to the 80 million kina given to NDB. Sixth and the last point is the policy drivers are the big time benefactors of the government sponsored scheme. They will water this down on management fees. And the perfect excuse will be the cumbersome statutory requirements or the processes that SME operators must meet. Before registering your company or business and opening your bank accounts, you must firstly have 1. NIDs. 2. Driver's license. 3. Passport. How easy have they made the NID process? Is a question we are asking. Does every citizen in PNG have a card to possess a driving license? How often do table market operators or PNB operators or trade store operators travel around the world to possess a passport? These are all crazy requirements. The policy eagerly segregates and targets a certain class of citizens and is not for all and any citizen in PNG. It is only for the connected, and if you are not, it's just too bad for you. This policy is creating false hope in people that they can be business owners tomorrow and be successful in life, making money they have not even started making. Entrepreneurship is a special skill. It does not just grow low-hanging fruits overnight. In my next episode, I'll discuss my best tips about how the SME policy can work in PNG. That's it, guys. Support my channel to learn more great content by subscribing and sharing the video. Thank you all, and I'll see you in the next one.